So recently, Ateneo released grades, and I think technically I am an Ateneo graduate already. So yeah, congrats to me, I guess. I guess this is going to be the pinch of disclaimer that I want to say before every video. I am not an honor student, although technically I am above average. It's a B, so take what I say with a grain of salt. Although there was one sem that I did get DL, but warning again, I don't attribute my grades in that semester with this note-taking system. There are a lot of different factors that come into play when it comes to getting high grades. I'm still learning that because I only had that once. So this video is just going to show you guys my habits and my whole process when it comes to taking notes before, during, and after a lecture. And hopefully you guys get a nugget of information from this whole video, even just a tiny little bit. Okay, so let's get to the first part, which is before the lecture. So in this part, there is a big if, as in this will determine whether I do this part or not. If I have time, I will try to read the chapter or the topics or even the slides if the prof gives it before the lecture even starts. There are a lot of different things that are pulling my attention, so the easiest thing to do is just to go into a lecture blind. But I try my best to read up before the class even starts because it does two things. I reinforce the right information that I read from the chapter or from the slides, and I correct the wrong information that I got from reading. In my own experience, at least in my student life, I usually went to lectures with a blank slate. I mean this in the sense that I only start my learning process when the lecture starts. And it can be hard sometimes if that happens because most of the time, whatever the prof says or whatever the prof shows in his slides or her slides, you won't retain it. And sometimes I don't even read in depth, so I don't go point by point in the book or slide by slide in the PowerPoint. Sometimes I just brush through the headers and also the slides just so I get an idea on what is going to happen in the next lecture. In hindsight, I think a benefit to this is if the previous topic and the next topic are related, you can start making the connections early on so that when the lecture starts, you already know how things are going to play out with the things that you already know. Hopefully that made sense. So now I think we can move on to the next part, which is the lecture proper. So I've been reading up on habits lately. Books like Power of Habit and Atomic Habit have been on my reading list. So I don't know if this is my own idea or I got it from those books, but I think that people seem to revert back to their old routines or their old habits, especially if it has the least amount of resistance with the same perceived benefit. So to explain that line, I'll just use myself as an example. When it comes to taking notes during a lecture, the easiest thing for me to do is to just write verbatim what the prof says and what's on the slide. Because in my mind, the benefit of doing that is I will have taken down everything that happened in the class. So I won't have to remember everything. But the other side of the coin for doing this is it's a lot more tiring and your notes are gonna be longer. And even if you write down every single thing the prof says, it doesn't necessarily translate into saying that you understood what he said. My way to actively combat this is I write down the main idea, not the PowerPoint slides or not the words that the prof will say. So there are three ways that I do this. I write down keywords. If I do write down the descriptions of those keywords, I try to shorthand or make it as concise as I can. And third are just writing questions for myself to either self-quiz after the lecture or to ask the prof in a later date. Okay, I think we can move on to how I self-study, which is after the lecture. And again, I do realize that there are a lot of subjects that try to get my attention. So I think that prioritization and time management comes into play here. I try my best. And I always say I try because sometimes it doesn't work, but then this is the ideal setting. I try my best to already study my notes around 2 to 3 days after the lecture. And it's not even finish studying it, it's just to start it again. I do this because I learned about something called the forgetting curve. So as you learn something, with the y-axis as you're learning, as time goes by, your learning or your memory of it goes down quite significantly. I actually looked up a percentage, and people often forget 77% of what they learned after 6 days. That is pretty crazy. So to interrupt this curve, I try my best to read at least 2 to 3 days after the lecture. How I found out about the 2 to 3 days, it's just personal experimentation, and it really depends on my schedule. So I try to give myself that sort of leeway and deadline at the same time. When it comes to self-studying, I use my iPad Pro and also my laptop. I try to get the chapter of the book and also the slides if the prof gives it, because that will be my outline. But if the prof doesn't give the slides, I use my own notes as the outline. And the first thing I do is I try to brush read on my notes and on the lecture slides, just so I have an idea on how the whole study session will flow. And I think this will prime myself into a study mode session already, because I'm already reading up, so my mind will basically go, oh, here we go, my guy, let's tackle this. And I think that this is a good way to start, because you get to figure out which parts you need to actually study on and which parts you can just put in a nice to know box in your brain so you don't end up studying the wrong thing. Personal preference, really. So when it comes to actually writing the notes, I use the keywords that I wrote down and also the questions that I wrote down as a guide to what I think I should know from that lecture. In an ideal scenario, after that specific study session, hopefully I know at least half of the questions or at least half of the keywords that I wrote down. Into a specific view of how I take notes, I use a bullet point system. Basically, I use a bullet point, dash, bent arrow, arrow, straight, and then an asterisk. I honestly have no clue how I made up this system, and it just worked, so I just kept it. Because of time constraints, even when I write down my own notes, I still try to make it as concise as possible, but I don't make it too concise that I sacrifice the information that I need. And the thing is, I don't verbatim copy from the book or from the slides. I try to make it into my own words. So I read a line and then think to myself, what does this mean to me, or what does this say, or what is it trying to say? Something like those. I also try to make use of different colors just to distinguish what type of information it is. I'll just read my script. Blue means general info or things I already know. Green is added to the blues. It's like added information or maybe even lists. Red are key terms. White are for drawings, headers, and questions I write for myself. When it comes to drawings and diagrams, I try to include as much as I can. I'd like to think I'm a visual learner, but I don't passively copy the image, diagram, or table. So what I try to do, like I keep saying try, is I try to read up on the figure and table first, try to see each part of it, try to memorize it, and then close it and draw it from memory. Rather than mindlessly copying it, I try my best to actually remember what I need to know. After writing down 1 page worth of notes, I start writing the questions on the left side, and these questions are just to quiz myself specifically on what's on the content side. After writing down all the questions, I try to answer them just so I can test if I actually understood the topic or not. Side note, by the way, I don't know why people write on their iPad on portrait mode. I mean, it does simulate a notebook, but it's so weird to me. I'm not judging, by the way, I just don't understand. So for the fourth part, which I said was the bonus part, and that is going to be how I will study my notes before an exam or a quiz. The ideal scenario again is that days before the exam, I already finished writing down my notes. So all I have to do really is read the questions that I wrote for myself and try to answer them. And if I can answer them, then that's good, super good, because I feel that I have learned that part already. If I don't, it's fine. I can just look at my notes again, try to understand it, try to read it again, and then try to answer the question as best as I can. So I have a specific way of studying the drawings or the figures that I draw, and that is I erase every step or every word on that figure, and then I try to re-input them from memory again. So I just brush read the whole thing, erase everything, and then try to write them down. And yeah, I guess it's just a good way to start visualizing how the diagram is supposed to look like for me, so that you guys can visualize what I've been talking about for the past few minutes. I will now show you guys my notes and how it translated into my Notability / Goodnotes notes. So in my notes, I wrote down that there are 4 types of tissues, and then I shorthanded what the tissues do, which is basically form organs. I honestly don't know why I even wrote this, because it's supposed to be obvious to me at that point. So with each keyword, I only wrote down a short version of their functions. For epithelial, I wrote down protect, absorb, secrete. Muscle, digest, propulsion. Nervous, send nerve impulses. So on the Notability version of it, this is what it looks like. So types of tissues on top, then epithelial tissue. I wrote down the same function. In green, I wrote down the additional information, which are basically examples for each function. So protection, epidermis, absorption, intestines, secretions, parenchyma of glands. So another good example for how I use different colors is my Goodnotes, because I think I really fleshed out my note taking here. So let's go on to talk about the carbohydrate metabolism. So in the lecture for carbohydrate metabolism, the prof talked about how I guess people metabolized or used up different types of sugar. So in my notes, at least I tried to shorthand a lot because the lecture was happening quite a bit faster than usual. And this is where you see what I talked about a while ago, which is writing down questions. So here in fructose metabolism, where do you find fructose? There's also a question up top, which was how to intake glucose and what transporter does it use? Fructose entry not insulin dependent, how? So it basically means how does it go inside if it's not using insulin? So a good way to show the comparison is if I show how I answered each question. Where to find fructose is answered by the first point already, which is fructose is from sucrose. And added information, sucrose is basically fructose plus glucose in green. So if fructose entry is not insulin dependent, how is it taken up? I show it as diffusion as transportation, easy uptake and release. And I guess to further visualize how I draw diagrams, here on the clinical correlates part, the question was what is up with essential fructosuria and hereditary fructose intolerance. So I drew the whole pathway here on the side with white. And then because each clinical correlate is a interruption in the pathway, I just wrote down the X on the arrows so that I know which specific step are they inhibiting. So that pretty much ends this video. Hopefully you guys found this helpful, insightful, and also entertaining. Yeah, all 5 years of my Ateneo life has culminated to this note-taking system, which now I realize I will have to change for med school. Which is perfectly fine, you know. More efficiency is better efficiency. Again, thank you so much for watching my video and maybe other videos as well. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Subscribe if you like what you see here so that, you know, I know that you guys like my content. If you guys have a video in mind that you want me to do, just comment them down below so that I can see what I can do. And as per the usual end card, subscribe here and my next videos are up there. And yeah, see you guys in my next video. Peace. My cap, my guy.